All right, it's recording.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. This is Andrew Hayes with the Alliance. Today I have another special guest, Dr. Stefan Kinsella. Uh, he's an attorney, patent attorney, uh, IP attorney. He's written a quite a few books, and you have a new book out that came out in 2023. Is that right?
Yeah, this one here.
So I didn't know about that. I
It's
just found
it's on
this
my
out.
website. It's free for free download too, if anyone wants it. But
Okay.
it's you can buy it too. But it's on my website.
Good, good. Yeah, so I've had this one for years,
Yeah.
and what this one is it's against intellectual property, which I'm sure you hear that, and look, this book is a whole of 60 pages, but it packs a punch, and man, there's just so much there. I didn't invite Stefan on to talk about that. We'll talk about that another time. What I wanted to talk about was free speech. Like that book behind him, um, Kinsella is a legal theorist of sorts, and so you're a free speech absolutist?
Well, that's a complicated way of putting it.
Here we go.
Probably by the way most people think of it, I'd be even worse than an absolutist. Even further than that. But I think that when people talk about rights and they talk about them being absolute, I think that that's usually so I'm a very principled anti-state libertarian, okay? Um, Even an anarchist, so that's my flavor of libertarianism, anti-state. Um, and that means I believe in property rights being inviolable, which means they shouldn't be violated by private crime or by the state. But when people say if you when we use the term absolute to describe rights, the problem is you don't need to say that. Like if I say I believe in rights, I have the right not to be murdered. I don't need to add the word absolute. It's still the same thing. And the problem is if you say absolute, then we open ourselves up to our critics who say that we're extremists because we believe in absolute rights. Like we don't believe in any exceptions or any moderation, any balance. So I think it's just better to say I believe in rights. And what rights mean is that there are certain things that you can't do without violating people's rights. There are certain laws that are unjust because they violate people's rights. You don't have to say absolute. Now, so I believe in property rights, and I think that aggression or force is the only way to violate them, and that's unjustified. And any law that is in place in society, whether it's a free society, a private law society, an anarchist society, or even our current society, any law that you have is an unjust law if it directs force against someone who's not committed aggression. But if it's a pointing force at people that are using aggression, that's a justified law. So a law against murder is perfectly justified. Um, so that's what aggression is. Now, free speech, most people think of free speech as one of our rights. I don't think that's actually technically correct. There is no right to free speech as a general matter because, it depends on where you are. If you're on your property, you can say whatever you want, but that's not because you have a right to free speech. It's because you're using your property and you're not hurting anyone else. So it wouldn't make any sense to say, I've got a right to take a bath in my house. I mean, I've got a right to do that because it's my house, but there's no list of rights which includes the right to take a bath. Because there could be a million of those rights, right? I got a right to eat chocolate ice cream. I got a right to eat strawberry ice cream. I got a right to, to watch The Price is Right on TV. You could name anything. So you have the right to do anything that doesn't violate other people's rights, which means they have property rights and you can't invade their property rights. That's what aggression and crime is. So free speech just means the right to speak. But you don't have that right on someone else's property. If you enter someone else's property, you got to do it according to their rules. On your property, you have that right, but it's not because you have the right, it's because you have a property right in your house. Now, what happens is when we have a government which I think we should not have. The state usually commits aggression against people, and it's a criminal organization, right? That's the anarchist view. But if you're going to have a government, you ought to keep it restricted to core functions of protecting rights, like having laws against murder and theft and things like that. Okay? The problem is once you have a government or a state, it's a danger to rights because the biggest violation of rights comes from the government. So you have private criminals out there who are a danger and a threat to us, and you have the state, which is a threat to us. It's a threat to us because number one, it doesn't do a very good job of protecting us against private criminals. And number two, it also creates criminals by the drug war and things like that. And number three, it becomes a criminal itself when it steals from you for taxes or when it threatens to put you in jail for doing things that are not crimes, like if you smoke marijuana or sell it or sell cocaine, or if you refuse to fight in their wars, dodge the draft, or if you don't pay your income tax, they will put you in jail. Those laws are unjustified laws. So because the government is very dangerous, what we try to do is we say, okay, we think we need a government. Now, I think that's mistaken. But some people think we need a government. So what we try to do is in the West, at least in America, is we have constitutions where we try to lay out what the government can do and put limits on that government. So the Constitution has limits on, so the Constitution gives the federal government power to do things, to pass laws, but it also puts in their rights. It puts limits on what the government can do, and what they call those rights. One of them is in the First Amendment. It's called the right to free speech. So it's not a real right in the sense of you have a right to do anything, but what it is, it's a way of saying in when you say the right to free speech in the First Amendment, what it's saying is you're not violating someone's rights when you speak, and therefore the government doesn't have the power to regulate it. So it's just another way of saying the government should not have the power to regulate what things people say. And of course, I agree with that. And in that sense, I'm an absolutist. But like I said earlier, um, um, you don't need to say absolutes. You can just say I have the right to free speech, and the government doesn't have the right to stop me. Now, there are some exceptions, but they're not exceptions to the right to free speech. They're reasonable common sense exceptions, which a lot of libertarians get tripped up on. So, for example, um, we believe that crime by the state is wrong, which is why you shouldn't have a tyrannical government that violates our rights. But also, private crime is wrong, right? So, someone running around stealing and raping and murdering people is a criminal, and they shouldn't do that, and they should be prohibited by law. But in addition to crime by the state and crime by individual criminals, you can have organized crime. You can have two or more people join together to commit a crime, like the mafia, or just two people robbing a bank or robbing you in your house. And collective crime should be prohibited as well. But what that means is there's a complicated cooperation between people sometimes not to do good things, which is what the free market is about. It's about people cooperating to do productive and good things and peaceful things. But you have people collaborating and cooperating to perform collective crimes. So like two or three people getting together. So if you have like the leader of a gang and he tells his henchmen to go out and rob a bank or kill someone, kind of these libertarian purists might say, well, um, the guy that the henchman that kills the guy that he was told to kill is guilty of murder, but the
Hmm.
boss is not guilty because all he did was speak. So you could say, well, he's got a free speech right to say whatever he wants. And I think
Mhm.
that's taking it too far in the sense that the reason free speech should not be regulated is because normally when you speak words, you're not hurting anyone else. You're not aggressing against their property. But in some
Mhm.
cases you are. Like if you're President Truman and you say to your you say to order the Enola Gay to drop a bomb on Nagasaki. You're giving a command which in a hierarchical structure has a cause, and the cause is you cause this guy to kill people. Or if you're the if you lie on a witness stand and you say that guy committed murder and you're lying and the guy gets convicted, then your words are causing harm to that guy. And in those
Mhm.
cases, I do believe that speech um, can play a causal role in aggression and should be prohibited. So the fundamental issue is, do your actions cause the invasion of the borders of someone else's rightfully owned property? That's fundamentally what justice is about and what libertarianism is about.
Well, I've been known to open up a can of worms uh,
You
down
did.
the
Good job. Good
anarchism.
job.
Going down anarchism is so just and I'm not trying to get bogged down in this, but people understand and it should be clear from everything else you said. You're against the state not because you want lawlessness,
Correct.
but you see the state as a violator of law.
Correct. And to the extent the state does a decent job of stopping real crime, it's doing something it should be doing or that should be done. We think there may be better ways to do it, but okay, I'm not opposed to laws against murder and punishing people that commit murder. Um, what happens is you have people that want a tyrannical government. They want government to have vast powers, and so they use the fear of anarchy to justify their power. And so most people rightfully are afraid of anarchy and chaos. And they mistakenly believe that if you don't have a government or a very strong government, you're going to have that. And because they believe that, they're willing to put up with the government, even though they understand that it's inefficient and it causes injustice on occasion. But they figure, well, it's better to have a limited government that on occasion makes a mistake because that's better than having lawlessness. But the anarchists like me are not bomb throwing people opposed to law and order. We actually are in favor of law and order and justice, and we believe in higher principles of law and right and wrong. In fact, that's the reason why we oppose the state is the same reason that you and the normal person oppose private crime because you think it's objectively wrong. And the same reason that you favor laws against murder and the reason we favor it is the same reason that we're concerned about the state because the state also engages in mass murder and theft, and that's our concern. So we're opposed to all kinds of crime and aggression, and because we're opposed to that, and because we believe in private property rights, and we because we believe in law and order, that's our concern about the state. So that the state actually reduces our rights and makes it harder to have law and order and fairness and justice. So yes, there's a certain type of anarchist, which is us, and I don't even like to use the word usually. I would say private property order, or people that just believe in voluntary relations among people as much as possible, with a strong right to self-defense and institutional protection by your neighbors and by any companies, whether they're security forces or insurance agencies or armies or the government in this case. We should push for them to support people's rights and not violate people's rights.
Um, yeah, and so well, okay, so kind of flipping back to the term absolutist, it's because so many other people say they're for the free market, and they're really not. And so to distinguish yourself from them, I'm a free market absolutist, um, and I have this kind of idea that I think a lot of people agree with in my audience is that there is nothing that the government does that the free market couldn't do better, aside from destruction and killing, that i.e. war. Um, and it's like you take that and run with it. Like I'm saying it almost hyperbolically, but you're like, no, the market could operate roads and police and courts and all of the above.
Yes, and yes, that's one way to put it. I would say the government's good at another thing too. So the states are good at destruction. They're also good at propaganda because they've gotten us to believe that they're necessary.
Mm.
Um, and look, most of us would be happy to have a minimal, limited government that taxed us at 5% and had an army and courts and the police and minded its own business otherwise. We would be happy
Yeah,
with
that's
that.
what we're trying for.
The problem is, anarchists are accused of being unrealistic and of being dreamers and believing in something that's impossible. I mean, I would put that back on people that believe in limited government. I'd say, what makes you think limited government is possible? Because there's no limited governments in today's world, and I don't think there's ever been one. Um, There have been a few that
Hmm.
are maybe closer to what we think is a limited government, but not really. And the reason is obvious. Once you put a group of people in power and they have all the armed forces, they have the courts, they have the right to decide on whether their own actions violate their own constitution. We talk about the Supreme Court in the US as being one of the branches of government, and we call it a separate branch, but it's still a branch of the government or of the state. So you have the legislative, which is Congress and the federal government, and you have the executive, which is the president, and then you have the judges, but they're all just employees of one organization called the state. And so when you have one branch of that group deciding on whether or not the actions of any of the branches of that government are constitutional, they're deciding in their own favor, and that's naturally going to lead to them to decide in their own favor. They're going to judge, they're going to say, yeah, we have the right to do that. Because they're not like a neutral, unbiased third party. They're themselves. So that's one problem with trusting the government, which is one reason we libertarians have a nuanced and so we believe in lots of checks on state power. So one check on state power in our system is the trilateral, set of power, the division of powers, the tripart division of powers between the three branches. But
Hmm.
also in the legislature, you have bicameral legislature, you have two houses. Then you also have a Bill of Rights which puts limits on that government. And then you also have vertical separation of powers, that is power between the states and the federal government. So, and then you also have the powers of, the press and then the churches and private families. All these different institutions in society operate as checks on the unbounded and what would otherwise be an unlimited and unbounded power of the central state. Um, they're just not enough, but at least they're there to some extent.
Right, right. Uh, I don't know. I feel like we could talk about that for another hour, but to tie back into to the ideas of speech, the reasonable restrictions. You hit on one. Um, Speech that is integral to criminal conduct. That's one of the exceptions. Another exception, a very old one, is defamation.
Yes.
And a while back, a lady was running for an office, and so it was opened up for debate, and I had to stand up and call her out for her actions, and like it was some awful things, but it's like, hey, look, she's lied. Her character uh, is bad. She's lied. There's a history of lying, and I called that out. And so now, as a result, um, I don't know, the word lawsuit has been brought out, defamation case. Um, the idea of defamation, you agree, everybody agrees, you shouldn't go around and lie about people, but even if you tell the truth, you can still be taken into court and put through the process, even if you're telling the truth.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Well, as I have a contrarian view on intellectual property, even though I'm a patent attorney, I think patent law and copyright law should be abolished. I also there's a big problem with defamation law. I think defamation law should also be abolished. I actually have the latest book I have came out last year. It's this book of essays in honor of Hans Hermann Hoppe, and in there I have a chapter on this topic on defamation law. Um,
good,
we can talk about that if you want, but defamation law is a law that it shouldn't be a crime to lie about people. In general. There are some exceptions, but in general, lying is a bad thing. It's dishonest and it's immoral. And certain types of lies can be very harmful. Um, but they shouldn't be a crime, but and it shouldn't be actionable under libel law and defamation law for reasons which we can go to if you like. But the main reason is that it's based upon the assumption that you have a reputation which you have a right to, which means you have a reputation to what other people think about you, but you don't really have you don't have a right to what other people think about you. And the other problem with defamation law, aside from its injustice, is that it basically, just like a lot of these laws, it favors certain institutional big guys, big players, because it makes the little guy think he's got something with this right to sue for libel or defamation, just like he thinks having a patent or a copyright helps him out, but it really ends up giving monopoly power to the publishers and to the big companies. Defamation law ends up helping people that defame him, and then the little guy can't really use it because it's too expensive to file a lawsuit. In
Hmm.
most cases, there's some exceptions. I think Alex Jones got sued for $1 billion by some,
Yeah.
which is shows how outrageous it is. $1 billion, no matter how bad what you said is, I mean, $1 billion is just insane. Um, but defamation law makes defamation more common and more powerful, which is counterintuitive. But let me
We'll,
explain
we'll
why.
talk about that.
Yeah,
Explain why that is.
because under today's law, everyone thinks that you have a right to sue for defamation if someone tells a lie about you. Um, and therefore, if you don't bother to sue when someone lies about you because you don't have the time or the money to hire a lawyer to do it, then people say, well, it must have been true. Otherwise, he would have sued, right?
Hmm.
Or correspondingly, it gives more credence to the lies people tell because people say, well, the lie when this guy says this guy's a child molester or whatever, it must have been true because no one's gonna say that unless it's true because they know that they would risk um, paying a big damages in a defamation or a libel lawsuit. So the
So,
so the existence of libel laws makes people believe libel.
hmm.
If there was no libel law, then everyone would know that they would have to take anything someone says about someone else with a grain of salt because they know that they have the absolute right to say it and do it, and it might not be true. In other words, they wouldn't say, well, Kinsella was called a child molester and he didn't file a lawsuit against the guy. Well, I don't have the right to file a lawsuit because there's no libel law. So you couldn't read into my lack of action that I'm agreeing that it was true because I don't have the right to do anything about it.
I appreciate where you're coming from, but I feel like um, I'm also against this one, but I think from another angle, it's that people are scared to say bad things about other people that are true
Yes.
because they're afraid they're going to get sued. And
Yeah.
so
Yes. Well,
everybody in the
yeah.
room,
Yeah.
everybody in the room knows that this woman is a liar,
Yes.
but I'm the only one that's going to stand up and say so. And nobody else wants to get involved. Nobody else wants part in it.
Yeah.
Um, and
Well, that's the biggest problem with defamation law. It's very similar to copyright law. Copyright law and trademark law too, to an extent, they exert a chilling effect on what people are willing to say. You won't say certain things because you know you might get sued for copyright infringement, or you can't use certain words to describe your competitor's products because they might sue you for trademark infringement, right? And by the same token, you're even if you think it's true, you don't want to be sued in an expensive lawsuit under a libel claim so you don't say it, right? But the occasional guy like you might have the courage to say it, but a lot of people they keep their mouth shut because they're afraid to. I mean, look, if if I think it's common now if someone leaves their company and they go work for another company and the new company wants to call their old employer to get a reference. In almost every case, unless it's like a glowing review, the old company just refuses to say anything because they don't want to be sued for
interesting.
libel for defaming the guy. So they can't give
Wow.
information to the new employer that he's a good guy or he's a bad guy. It's a chilling effect, right? And by the same
Yeah.
token, if you see someone is really bad, only a few reckless people that have nothing to lose, which we sometimes call losers, right? That's what a lot of libertarians are like that. We have nothing to lose. Or people that are just extraordinarily courageous, people are not going to say anything. So if you got rid of libel law, you would be free to call someone out if they were a liar or if they were a bad person.
So I'm going to pause and just uh, shout out OTU Media. Uh, that's where my podcast is at. It's the Alliance with Andrew Hayes, and I'll get right back into it. Uh, so jumping from that to fighting words, I like the fighting words doctrine.
I do too.
You
I
do?
I do.
Okay. All right. So see
But by
the
the way,
defamation.
but before we go there, let me mention. I mentioned there are some exceptions to my opposition to defamation law, and that is very similar to what we talked about before about like conspiracies or concerted actions. Um, if you are on the witness stand in a criminal trial and you lie about the defendant and you say yes, he committed the murder or the arson or whatever it is, and it's a lie, and that causes him to go to prison, I think. I mean, that's very similar to what defamation is using your words that causes harm to people. And if it causes physical harm in an aggression sense, I think you should be responsible. So that's the type of things that some people think defamation law would stop. And it should be stopped, but it should just be stopped by criminal liability. Now, let's go ahead to your fighting words example.
Yeah. Well, so it's much the same, and my issue is never about reputation. Call it old fashioned or old school or ridiculous. I don't know, but there's something about an honor culture that makes sense. It's not about what other people think about you. It's not reputation. It's no. It's Stefan. It's expensive to be honest. And if you sell a tractor, to be honest and say, yeah, the transmission is weak. It's going to go out at some point. That's going to cost you thousands of dollars to be honest
Yeah.
and disclose that.
Yeah.
And it's an expensive thing to do. And so if somebody calls me a liar, uh, I've fought over that more
Well,
than
okay,
once.
no, 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 no. Fighting words to me is a little bit different than that. So fighting words usually is like a context, like you're at a bar, and you walk up to someone and you say, "Your mom was ugly," you know, and
Well,
then and
I
then
mean,
then you get a punch in the nose, or you say, or you're rude to the guy's date. I mean, basically, they're actions that are expected to provoke a physical response. So let's take a case like that, rather than so you're before we get to your case. Um, the reason I would say that's you could justify that type of response in some cases is look similar to why do we why do we say that if the two guys are boxing in a boxing match, they can't sue each other for assault and battery, even though they're hitting each other.
right.
Why is that? Because they consented. And football players are being hit all the time on the field, and they don't sue each other for battery.
Hmm.
The reason is because it's consensual, right? I mean, the difference between rape and normal sex is consent.
Hmm.
They look like the same thing to an outside observer.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's just consent. Consent is what makes a difference. Now, I would say, but consent doesn't have to be an official formal thing. It can be implied by the circumstances and by informal
Right.
customs. And
Yes.
everyone knows if a guy walks up to another guy at a bar and some guy wearing tattoos, some biker or whatever, and you start insulting him to his face, you might get punched. So I would characterize that as an invitation to fight. Like you're
Yes.
basically consenting to a fight, just like two guys having a street fight. They're consenting to it. That's why I would make an exception for fighting words. Now, what was your case again? It was a little bit less.
Oh, being called a liar, and I would argue that the context matters. No offense to anybody out there in, you know, Boston or Massachusetts or anything, but no, I'm telling you, in Western Oklahoma, if you call somebody a liar, uh, it might not go well for you.
No, I agree with that. I think, look, I would say that technically speaking, in some cases, you probably are committing a crime of aggression if you physically go after someone for bad mouthing you. If it's, I mean, I don't know if that's exactly rise to the level of the fighting words scenario I'm talking about.
I see.
Especially, however, sometimes I think people have it coming. I mean, the legal system is something that we have the luxury of having, right? That's
Hmm.
something that primitive man didn't have, except in very crude ways. You think about what the purpose of law is. We have people living together in society, and there's a good thing about living in society is people can trade with each other and they can live with each other. But the danger is there's possibility of conflict over things like their bodies and other things that they own. Like someone might want to kill me, use my body without my percent, or rape me, or they might want to take my, take my food or take my animal or something like that. So the danger is other people's actions. And so what we do is we develop norms that try to make it harder for people to do that. So one thing you might do is to keep from being robbed, you might have locks on your door and you might have a gun, right? Those are practical things you can do. But you also might have a legal system where everyone in your community kind of agrees that those things are not they're not permissible, and they agree that it should be illegal and they should be punished, and they might come to your help and all this kind of stuff. So that's what the legal system is there. It's another layer on top of your physical protection of your own property with your own means, and then cooperating with others, and then getting laws that everyone agrees are fair to add another layer to help you avoid violence and aggression from other people. But there's a limit to that because that's costly. Like if I get if some girl gets raped and there's a trial of the rapist, you're going to find 12 people who are happy to be jurors, right? And to listen to the evidence, and the judge will decide, and the guy might get convicted and all this kind of stuff. But if I'm just some asshole who keeps filing nuisance lawsuits every other week against my neighbors for a $5 debt, my neighbors at a certain point are going to say, "Dude, I don't want to, you know, I don't want to help you out. It's not worth it to me to help you out. You can wear your welcome out." And by the same token, someone walking around asking for trouble might find it hard to get sympathetic neighbors to help him out. Not because the guy he insulted has the right to punch him, just because that's the natural result of what he did. And by the way, your comment about honor and all this reminds me of something. There's a famous case I like to quote, which was um, you had some Wisconsin judge visiting Texas. This is like 100 years ago,
Hmm.
and this judge was talking to a Texas judge, and the Wisconsin judge says, "I don't understand something about your criminal law because." Um, Under your law, you always execute horse thieves, but sometimes you let a guilty murderer go free. Why is that? And the Texas judge says, "Well, there never," he said, "Well, there never was a horse that needed killing." Which,
That's right. Yeah.
you but the other thing your story reminded me of was there was a famous case about 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It was called the Texaco Pennzoil Getty case wars, and it was a case where I always mix the parties up. I think Getty made a deal with Pennzoil to buy it from Texaco or something like that. Anyway, one of them had a deal to buy the other one, and and then the other company came in and says, "We'll make you a better offer." So the company that was going to be bought said, "Okay, we'll sell to you for a higher amount." Okay, and then the company that was going to buy the company sued sued the company that bought them in court for interfering with their contract. And and that company brought a bunch of New York lawyers down to Texas, and their defense was, well, there was no contract, there was just a handshake deal. Well, Joe Jamile, the lawyer for the Texas company, went before that jury and he says, I don't know how they do things in New York City, but in Texas, a man's handshake is his word. And
Yeah.
the jury said, well, it was a deal. They did agree to it. They shook their hands on it. And so that bankrupted one of the companies, and it was one of the biggest lawsuits in damage awards in history at the time. Um, and I think that was right. I think well, actually, the legal theory wasn't right, but the idea that you could have a contract that's binding just by a handshake, there's nothing wrong with that, and that just goes to show you that some areas it really matters. Your word is your bond.
My granddad explained it to me like this: you draw up a contract not because you don't trust the other party or because they don't trust you, but because you don't trust your memory. If
Correct.
the deal is going to carry on for 6 months,
Correct.
well, let's write it down so we remember.
Correct.
And that's the idea. It's not like, oh, I got this piece of paper and I'm going to take you in front of a judge. That could happen, but that's not the point.
By the way, let me mention one other alternative here that the creative libertarian minds can think of to solve your problem. In the old days, what when you had a real honor culture, think about how Alexander Hamilton got killed, right? You used to have
Yes.
duels. So if you insulted someone, or you insulted their character, or you called them a liar, you might get challenged to a duel. Now, the government's outlaw duels mostly nowadays. Um,
Yes.
but if that ought to be legal because people should have the right, just like boxing should be legal and and voluntary euthanasia. What do you call it? When you commit suicide, that should be legal. It should be illegal to do it whatever you want to yourself, including including duels. And so, if that was legal, and if someone lied about you, you could challenge them to a duel. And of course,
Well,
they're going to refuse. And that
yes.
would be a way of regaining your honor. You could say, okay, well, instead of a libel lawsuit, instead of fighting, challenge them to a duel.
Well, and dueling should be legal. Um, Absolutely. And by the way, I've never like accosted anybody, like jumped out of the bushes and I'm not a savage. I've called them out
Yeah.
and we've gone outside, and that's how it, like gentlemen. Um,
And that's not even fighting words. That's actually someone actually expressly consenting to a fight. I think that's perfectly legitimate.
right, but the idea though is that if somebody called me ugly or stupid, these things are relative compared to what. Uh, I'm stupid compared to Mises, and ugly compared to Brad Pitt. Whatever.
I don't know.
But
I think I take you over Brad Pitt.
okay, well, that's nice of you. But those things are relative. Granddad and Granddad, took those insults. They just rolled off his back. But man, if somebody ever called him a liar, he got real hot real quick, and it got a little bit western.
Well,
But
I agree with you, but in a bar, if I'm there with my date and some guy walks up to her and starts insulting my date and calls my date ugly, I might punch the guy.
yes, yeah, I mean, you start insulting the women
Wait a minute.
folk,
Yep, I agree.
that's a little bit different. Uh, the okay, there's one more. We're kind of running low on time, but uh, so I heard that some guy was walking along a beach and he found some seashells in a pattern that said 8647. Have
Yeah,
you heard
Comey.
about this?
Comey, that's right. James Comey, former FBI director, I believe.
Does it make a difference who he is, the former
Sure.
director of the FBI?
Absolutely. I think context matters.
Okay.
Now,
Well,
I
would it?
think I think it's that's a borderline case, I would say. But it's he probably made it borderline on purpose because he's a lawyer and he knows what he can get away with. But yeah, I think it's inching towards incitement or something like that or a threat.
Wow. Okay. I mean, it's not credible. It's not real. I don't know, the incitement. My idea of incitement to violence, like okay,
Yeah,
I
so
don't
say
think
I don't think
well,
it doesn't rise to the level of criminal responsibility because look, the law always is the common law has always said when can you use force against someone in self-defense, and you don't have to wait until they pull the trigger. Okay,
no.
if someone's got a gun in their holster and they say I'm about to pull this out and shoot you, I mean, well, if they haven't unholstered, I'm just saying you don't have to wait for them to pull the trigger.
Right.
You can do anticipatory or preemptive self-defense, but you got to do it only when there's a very clear, imminent threat that you can demonstrate later. You didn't have any other alternative. In this case, I think it's definitely on the legal side of things.
Okay.
What
Okay.
he
So you
did.
think it was legal? I guess my thought is, and I'm just curious if Joe Blow was walking along, or just somebody that wasn't a part of the FBI.
Yeah.
maybe it's somebody still famous, Whoopi Goldberg. She posted.
Yeah.
What is that? How far removed from
I think it's too
being
far removed
illegal?
because there's no chance she's going to carry it out. It's just sort of, it's inappropriate, I think, of course. And the reason I said it matters who he is because if I did it innocently, I didn't know what the numbers meant, then my
Uh,
state of mind has an effect on that. And Comey certainly must know what 86 means, being being involved in criminal prosecutions and all that. That's why that's why it matters what his intent was. But I don't think it was close to, yeah, I didn't mean to, all I meant was you could make a case out that it's along that spectrum, okay? But I
mhm.
think it's really far away from anything that's culpable. I
and,
wouldn't,
and
if it was me, I wouldn't take that chance. I mean, knowing that it's the Secret Service and there's federal laws against threatening the president, I wouldn't even come close to taking that chance because you're going to be investigated. But will he get away with it? I probably.
well, and just an aside, Comey absolutely lied. He absolutely knows what 86 means.
Yeah, yeah. But
Uh,
why did he lie? He lied because he started realizing he might be in trouble. So he was trying to build his defense up in case they go after him, to say that his state of mind was that I didn't know. That's why he was lying.
he should just be, what a coward. He should just say, you know what, I don't like the president.
Yeah,
It's hyperbolic. It's
yeah,
First Amendment. Leave me alone.
yeah.
And and then his case would be solid. Half the country wouldn't like him for it, but that's one of those things that come with free speech, right? Is people don't like what you say, so they don't like you.
I think that's right. I think, but your average person probably thinks that someone with that kind of reputation and former responsibility and position of influence probably has a little bit extra obligation to be careful about saying things like that, just as a moral matter. So they might be willing to give him a little bit less, like, I mean, I do think it would ultimately be treated as a free speech matter. Um, so yeah,
But because he's saying he didn't know what it meant and he didn't do it, of course he did it. Are you kidding me? But because he's lying about all that stuff, he's not even taking the First Amendment as a defense,
right.
and that seems that's sad. I think.
Yeah, and it's also sad he's a little like instead of doing that, why not just criticize Trump, explicitly. Say I think Trump is a lowlife. I think he's scum or something like that. I don't know what he said, but maybe he has.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Do, 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 do. Uh, Obscenity. That's on the list. Or true threat. Did we kind of get through true threat or no?
True
Well,
threat?
that's what we're talking about right here. That's this 8647. Is we're into the true threat portion of those exceptions. Um,
You
and
know,
that's one of those things. You're in favor of the true threat exception. So
remind me what that is.
okay, so that's the true threat is Virginia v. Black. Serious. If I could read my handwriting, I'm sorry. I can't read this crap. I'm sorry. Uh, I know it. I know there's a serious uh, a serious expression to commit a crime. The Somebody is explicitly targeted. There's an intent to intimidate or instill fear, and a reasonable perception of fear by the target.
I'd have to look at the details of that. I mean, what I've written on in my writing as a libertarian theorist, trying to explain. So in libertarianism, you ever notice libertarians always say this? First of all, they use the word they say non-aggression principle is our core thing. Um, Now, what that means is, I think non-aggression is the wrong word to use, really, but we use it as a stand-in for a bigger list of principles. What it really means is property rights in your body and property rights in things that you own.
That's
Um,
right.
because aggression as a word by itself really seems to just mean physical aggression, fighting between people. Which would only mean that if aggression is a crime, that's another way of saying everyone owns their own body, right? That's another way of saying that. But then they also own things other than their body. They own other things that they acquire in the world, like, your house and your car and things like that. And when people take those without your permission, we call that a crime, but you might call it aggression, but it's really like analogous to aggression because it's not physically, if I walk on someone's yard at midnight when they're sleeping and I trespass on their property, it's not really the same thing as committing aggression against them. It's using their property without their consent, right? But anyway, the point is, so libertarians say non-aggression as a shorthand to refer to the principles that we believe in, which is a set of property rights in our bodies and in other things. Um, but we also say that so you can't commit aggression against people or threats or fraud. They always tack those other two onto it as if they're part of it or they're extensions of it. Now, in my book, I do explain why I think that fraud is a type of aggression because it's the type of using someone's resource without their consent, without their knowing consent. But then threat, why is that a crime? And what is that? So like under the Louisiana Civil Code, where I'm the criminal code, where that's the state I'm from.
Mhm.
And this is in almost every state they have different laws. But in Louisiana, so you heard the term assault and battery. People would say
Mhm.
that together like they're the same thing. They're not the same thing. That's why they're two different words. There's assault and battery. They're different things. Battery means physically touching someone. That's actually a battery. Assault is the attempt to batter, right? So the question is, why are attempts or threats, things that are not actual carried out, but they're like signaling or they're actions that try to do something, why are they part and parcel of this, and why is that a crime or aggression? And in Louisiana, the way they define it is they'll say um, attempt at a crime. There's two types of attempted crime. So you'll notice someone they'll say they're being charged with attempted robbery and with robbery. Like they're separate offenses because they have different elements to prove them. Because you if you don't prove one, you might prove the other. Like, yeah, he
Mhm.
didn't carry through the robbery, but he attempted to do it, something like that, right? Or burglary or whatever. So there's two types of attempt. One is like if you have attempted murder or attempted battery. The first type uh is trying to do it, right? It could be a failed attempt, but it's still an attempt, and that's a separate crime. So if I try to shoot you and I miss, that's attempted murder, but it's not murder. But I could still be charged with attempted murder, right? Now, the second type is putting someone in reasonable fear of receiving a battery. And I think those are both justifiably treated as crimes. Putting someone in fear of receiving a battery is if I point a blank gun at you and it's not loaded, but you don't know it, I'm still making you think you're about to get shot, which is why you can use, a starter pistol to rob a bank,
Mhm.
right? Or an unloaded gun to rob a bank. It's still the same crime. Well, it's maybe a
Mhm.
different crime, but it's still a crime. The threat is not, you're not actually attempting to shoot them. If I pull a trigger of a starter pistol pointed at you, I'm not trying to kill you because there's no way it could happen if there's no way I can succeed. But you think I'm going to kill you. Or another example is if you're sleeping and I take an axe and I try to hit you with the axe and I miss, that's an attempt. That's attempted murder. But I'm not putting you in fear of receiving a battery because you're unconscious of it. So those are two different types there.
Hmm. Right. And so what you're saying is that the fraud well, okay. I'm sorry. I think I got my
Oh,
wires
so we're getting
crossed
back
there.
to so we're getting to threat. You were talking about the true threat doctrine. So I
Yeah.
would say that the typical common law standards that applies to self-defense means you can respond to someone threatening to hurt you if it's imminent and credible. Which the analogy there to what I was saying is you're putting someone in reasonable fear of receiving a battery, and then they're entitled to respond
Yeah.
accordingly.
Right. Right. Oh no, I was in the army once, and there was a standoff, and the other guy. So I'm not really interested in fighting. It's not what I do all the time, but uh, at the same time, a guy look just that situation. You can't just be like leave me alone and walk away. That's not
Right.
how the army operates. So, but what I did do is I started yelling and I was trying to make noise for other people to come in and break us up, and that didn't happen. That's not what happened. They all wanted to watch a fight, and so there's 40 witnesses, and the guy flinched at me, and I hit him, and I'm telling you, every every last one of them, uh, they all swore up and down that he did not swing at me. My perception was that he swung at me when he did his shoulder flinch, and so I hit him. But no, that's the perception, right? And we lost your sound.
Sorry, I said I would call that anticipatory self-defense, if you were reasonable in assessing the risk.
I mean, I was scared.
You were scared, and if now it depends on the context and what he should have known and what I mean. Do you think he really knew what he was doing, making you think?
Well, so the fun part is that what 90% of the population is right-handed, and my right arm was in a soft cast. So I also think that he didn't anticipate me reacting the way I did. Had he known that I was left-handed, he might have left me alone. So there's some comedy there to it too.
But
I
that's why I brought up the thing about people that are kind of troublemakers or asking for, or people that are filing nuisance lawsuits. People people that put themselves like if they put themselves in a situation, and I'm talking about the other guy here, where he's likely to make you punch him, and really it's his own fault. He could have avoided it, and why should a bunch of jurors have to spend 3 weeks or a week in the courtroom because
uh,
he screwed up?
as it turns out, like I didn't know this guy before it happened, but um, afterwards, it turns out this guy had been running his mouth since he got off the bus. And the drill sergeants, I overheard him in the office. They said, "Man, I knew that guy was going to get it. I just didn't think it'd be Hayes that would give it to him." So, you know, but yeah, sometimes that comes around, but there's commercial speeches left and obscenity. I think I think obscenity is pretty cut and dry. Basically, it's what one person sees as obscene, another person doesn't. We're going to always disagree on that.
Well, it's,
So,
it's it's not just that. As a libertarian, it's not just that the standards are arbitrary and vague and they shift over time and they're
mhm,
subjective. It's also that obscenity still doesn't violate someone's rights. I mean, you know,
right.
I mean, if I draw the wrong picture on a magazine of a certain prophet, certain people might come after me.
I don't know who,
And
but
and
yes,
my and the reason that what they do is wrong is not because what I'm doing is not really obscene. I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's obscene. The point is, it's
uh,
not hurting them. It's not violating their property rights. It's not
right.
trespassing. So they're not justified in using force against me. So the government's not justified in using force or laws to stop obscenity. For one reason, because it's as Jefferson said, sticks and stones. I don't know if he said sticks and stones, but he said, words don't hurt, words don't break my bones, right?
Ah,
They're just words. And then the
yes.
other problem with it is the constitutional ambiguity. Like it violates the First Amendment and other parts of the due process of the Bill of Rights. They prohibit laws that are just too vague or they're up to the subjective standards of the state, because then
Mhm.
the citizen doesn't really know what's illegal or not. And it puts too
Ah,
much discretionary power in the hands of the state. So that's another reason you can strike down a law, because it's unconstitutionally vague, they call it. So I would say an insanity law is unconstitutional for two reasons. It's too vague, so it gives too much power to the state to enforce it and interpret it, and the citizen doesn't have notice of really what's illegal. He has to wait until he's brought, until he's convicted to know, or he's brought to trial. And then the other one is he's not doing anything, he's not violating any rights. So the First Amendment should protect that.
Right, right. And I guess, it's a little bit late now, but the idea is, and I kind of neglected it because, like, come on, conservatives, as I told you before, my audience is conservative. It's Republican and Oklahoman. Uh, but look, if we're talking about property rights, that should be enough for the conservatives to be working off the same sheet of music,
I think
in my thoughts.
if you tell a common sense, mind your own business conservative who wants small government and low taxes, and you tell them, I'll make you a deal. You're gonna have very low taxes, and the government's gonna mind its own business, and they're gonna leave you alone to do whatever you want with your own business. But you can't pass laws saying what the religion's gonna be and regulating pornography and obscenity. That's the deal we're gonna make you. I think a lot of them might go for that.
Right, right. Um, well, I don't know where they might stand on defamation. I feel like there's this idea of rights and responsibilities,
Yeah.
which only works if you're talking about positive rights, not negative rights. But
Well, I think that, yeah, you have lots of private groups that where private reputation systems work just fine. If you have a comedian who's known to quote unquote steal other people's jokes, that's not a crime under the law because copyright doesn't really always cover that kind of thing. But you get a bad reputation and then you start losing gigs, right? There's ways of self-policing people, and if you go to eBay and you buy something from a seller, you're going to tend to buy from the guy that's made 1,000 sales and has a good reputation.
yes,
So the guy could defraud you, but then that's the last time he's going to sell anything on under that reputation thread. So the point is, and if you got rid of the defamation laws, you have to just rely upon other ways for people to get punished by the free market and by social circles, for being dishonorable. And we all know, I think conservative people know that people's character it demonstrates itself at a certain point, and people lose credibility at a certain point. When you cry wolf too many times, no one's going to listen to you.
right. Hey, Stefan, thanks again for coming on the show. I don't want to keep you over time. Um, and guys, I'm sorry, Stefan. I'm still really new at this.
That's all right.
Uh, give a plug, your website, and on Twitter, how people can follow you.
I'm at NS Kinsella on Twitter, and my website is stefankinsella.com.